Hey, Mike Zorns here, also known as the Political Otter, coming to you from the U of T campus. If you suddenly have the urge to say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," that's because it was filmed right there, right there. So, let's talk a little bit about some of the comments that have been going on the different channels here. And thank you to everybody who is chiming in. There's one in particular I want to focus on who had a little bit of a nihilistic view here, saying there is no future for Canada and to give my head a shake. So I'm going to take your advice. Just gave my head a shake, and gotta tell you, I'm still cautiously optimistic about what our future looks like. So let's break down a couple of things that are interesting about Canada today that absolutely would remain the same regardless of who the prime minister is and which party happens to be governing. So the first thing we're going to focus on is the demographic picture in Canada. If we look at what's happening in the world right now, there are a lot of places, China, Germany, Italy, right at the top of that list, where we're seeing a demographic changeover that there isn't a good analog for in human history. These are all countries that really stopped having babies for the most part around 40 years ago, or in the case of China, even a little bit more than that, are on the verge of population decline and are moving into economic models where there's just more people not working than working, which are models we don't really have a system for. So there's going to be a lot of upset and turmoil throughout the world. One thing that is really interesting about the two major North American economies, Canada and the US, is that we're experiencing something very different. And our experience is very different from the US for a very different reason. Mexico is also an anomaly compared to the rest of the world, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. So the Canadian picture is interesting. Most of the world does not have a millennial generation. Something that is very unique to the US is the millennial generation, and that most of that generation is naturally born. They are the children of the baby boomers. Canada, like most of the rest of the world, didn't really have enough babies throughout the 80s and 90s to create a big, huge generation coming up behind Gen X. This created a real problem, and under Stephen Harper, the guy was pretty smart. So he was definitely future looking. And as much as I might disagree with a lot of his policies, one of the things that he did to help ensure that in the 2020s, we weren't on the edge of a demographic cliff that was going to mean absolute collapse was to incentivize a very particular type of immigration. Highly educated, highly skilled, under the age of 40. This is for a couple of reasons. Wanted to ensure that anybody coming in were people who were going to add to the economy, add to the tax base, be able to pay for the baby boom retirement. And typically, anybody who's coming in below the age of 40 is always throughout the course of their career and working history going to end up paying more into the system than what they end up taking out of the system. This was started under Harper. This was expanded under Trudeau. So we definitely have both major political parties to be able to take all the credit and all the blame for the good, the bad, and the ugly of the 20-year immigration policy that Canada has had. It's definitely kept us from going off of one cliff. It's created some other challenges. But one of the things that keeps me really optimistic about Canada is that, A, we've got a millennial generation, a big generation under the age of 40 right now, who is coming up and building the future of tomorrow. And two, That's what's unique about Canada is that that is mostly an immigration generation that was built by the people who were intellectual flight wanting to come to North America from other parts of the world. We genuinely recruited and brought in the best and the brightest. So we do have the right people to build a fantastic future for the country already here. Number two reason that I like where Canada is going and why I do think we're strong, regardless of who is in charge, is our GDP. Now, a lot has been made of GDP per capita growth. We have the lowest in the G7, and that's bad. I will hand that to everybody out there on the conservative side of the scale. If that's your justification for not voting Liberal, you're not wrong. That's bad, but it's not as bad as it gets painted in a lot of social media or even in some of the reports in the regular media. Canada has also had the highest immigration rates per capita than anywhere else in the G7 over the same 10-year time frame is what we're typically talking about in all of the conversations around our lack of GDP per capita. When we break it down and just look at overall percentage growth of GDP, Canada is actually the highest. And total GDP growth, I believe we're number two, just behind the US. We've added a lot to our economy. We've added a lot of good to our economy. We've added a lot of desirable growth to our economy. We've also just added a lot of people, which is what accounts for that, 1.4% number. So the picture is not as bad as it looks if you only look at the one metric. There are other things that indicate, hey, Canada's a pretty good place to be. Number three, and this is what I really love. The US is freaking unstable, man. And there is still a ton of capital flight happening globally. So one of the big negatives that I don't think is often talked about the Trudeau administration, the Trudeau time as Prime Minister, is how much capital flight from the rest of the world went into our investment housing market. That is not the only, but absolutely one of the big contributors to artificially increasing the price of housing within Canada, particularly in Toronto and Vancouver. We are seeing that start to correct thanks to a tightening up on the regulations around that. But the reality is the tightening of regulations just means that the capital has to get a little more inventive into how it comes in. We're still seeing foreign investment and capital flight from unstable economies flooding into that particular market. But because the US is not a safe investment right now, we're seeing exactly what happened in 2008, where a lot of international capital flight that would normally head to the US suddenly parking itself in T-bills in Canada. So there's a big opportunity. There's about 5 more years where we're going to see a lot of Russian capital, a lot of German capital, and a lot of Chinese capital that can leave those systems find any excuse to leave those systems before those systems go into a much higher rate of collapse. If Canada is able to create some financial investments that are government-backed for that money to go to that looks more appetizing than real estate, not only can we deal with some of the problems of the housing bubble, we can actually fund a lot of the big growth initiatives that both the Carney government and if it would have been a conservative government under Pierre Poilievre were both saying Canada needed. What I hope with Carney, because he does seem to have such a strong understanding of the global system, is that we're going to see those types of financial mechanisms be created, and that's going to really help to put a major dent in the proposed deficit that he has. Now, we don't know if that's going to be the case or not. Hopefully we'll know a little bit more as soon as the throne speech happens here. But between now and then, these are a couple of the things that I'm really optimistic about our country that would have happened no matter who won the last election. So I'm not a nihilist. Our country's not about to fall apart. We're actually a really interesting and one of the safest places for the money that's out there globally to end up. And we can use it to fund a lot of the things to fix a lot of the problems that we have federally right now. It's just a question of whether or not we've got the right government to do it. We're going to find out real fast.